Gideon, one of the judges of Israel, was a man who started with doubts and fears, but grew into a courageous leader through his faith in God. His life is a story of divine calling, faith, and the power of God to work through our weaknesses. In this video, we'll explore Gideon's life, his calling by God, and the theological significance of his role as a judge in Israel. Gideon lived during a time of great oppression for Israel. The Midianites, along with the Amalekites and other eastern peoples, repeatedly raided the land, leaving the Israelites impoverished and in fear. This period of history, known as the time of the Judges, was marked by a cycle of Israel's disobedience to God, followed by oppression, cries for deliverance, and God raising up a judge to save them. Gideon's story begins in the midst of this cycle, as he and his people were struggling under the harsh rule of the Midianites. Understanding the historical and cultural context of Gideon's life helps us appreciate the significance of his calling and the challenges he faced as a reluctant leader called by God to deliver his people. Gideon's story is recorded in the book of Judges, where he is first introduced as a man threshing wheat in a winepress to hide it from the Midianites. It is here that the angel of the Lord appeared to him, addressing him as mighty warrior and announcing that the Lord was with him. Gideon's initial response was one of doubt and skepticism, questioning why, if the Lord was with them, they were suffering so much. The angel of the Lord then commissioned Gideon to save Israel from the Midianites, assuring him that the Lord would be with him. However, Gideon, still unsure of his ability to fulfill this calling, asked for a sign to confirm that it was truly God speaking to him. After receiving the sign of fire consuming his offering, Gideon began to take steps toward fulfilling his calling, but not without further signs and reassurances from God, including the famous test of the fleece. Gideon's reluctance and need for confirmation highlight his initial lack of confidence and faith, but they also demonstrate God's patience and willingness to provide assurance to those he calls. Despite his initial doubts, Gideon eventually gathered an army to confront the Midianites. However, God had a different plan in mind, instructing Gideon to reduce his forces from 32,000 to just 300 men, so that Israel would know that their victory came from God and not from their own strength. This reduction was a test of faith for Gideon and his men, but they obeyed God's instructions. The battle plan was equally unconventional. Gideon's 300 men were armed not with swords, but with trumpets, empty jars, and torches inside the jars. At Gideon's signal, they broke the jars, blew the trumpets, and shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon!" The noise and confusion caused the Midianites to turn on each other in panic, leading to their defeat. Gideon's victory over the Midianites was a clear demonstration of God's power to deliver his people, even when the odds seemed impossible. After the victory, Gideon was offered kingship by the Israelites, but he refused, insisting that the Lord was their ruler. However, Gideon's later actions were more problematic. He asked for a share of the gold taken from the Midianites and used it to create an ephod, which became a snare for Israel, leading them back into idolatry. Despite this, Gideon is remembered as a judge who delivered Israel from oppression and brought peace to the land for 40 years. Gideon's life is a complex story of faith and leadership, showing both the potential and the pitfalls of those who are called by God to lead his people. Theologically, Gideon's life and role as a judge emphasize the importance of faith, divine calling, human weakness, and God's power. Gideon's initial reluctance and need for confirmation reflect the reality that even those called by God often struggle with doubt and fear. However, God's patience with Gideon and his willingness to provide signs and reassurance highlight his grace and understanding of our human frailties. The reduction of Gideon's army and the unconventional battle plan underscore the central theme of God's power being made perfect in weakness, as it is written in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. Gideon's life challenges us to trust in God's calling, to rely on his strength rather than our own, and to recognize that victory comes from God, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Gideon's life offers profound lessons for believers today. His story challenges us to trust in God's calling, even when we feel inadequate or afraid. Gideon's need for confirmation reminds us that it is okay to seek reassurance from God and that He is patient with our doubts and fears. The victory over the Midianites, achieved through God's power and not human strength, encourages us to rely on God rather than our own abilities. However, Gideon's later actions also serve as a warning of the dangers of pride and the potential for even good leaders to lead others astray if they lose sight of God's guidance. As we reflect on Gideon's life, we are encouraged to trust in God's calling, to rely on His strength, and to remain humble and faithful in our service to Him. Gideon's story is a powerful testament to the importance of faith, reliance on God, and humility in the life of a believer. His life continues to inspire believers to trust in God's calling, to rely on His strength, and to remain humble and faithful in their service to Him. Thank you for joining us in this exploration of Gideon's life. If this video has deepened your understanding of Scripture, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more faith-building and inspiring content. Let's continue to trust in God's calling, to rely on His strength, and to remain humble and faithful in our service to Him, just as Gideon did.